And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the next coach of the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban.
Thank you very much. Expectations. I know there's tremendous expectations here for what you would like to accomplish with this football program. And I can tell you that however you feel about it, I have even higher expectations for what we want to accomplish.
In August 2022, Greg Harvey put out an interactive timeline of every team that's ever appeared as number one in college football's AP poll. Now, the AP poll has been around since 1936, so we're just going to skip ahead to the interesting part. And stop. Okay, now we're in 2006, and things are progressing along relatively normally, but then something starts to change. Yep, there they go. Between 2015 and 2017, Alabama leapfrogs USC, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Ohio State to take over the top spot. As far as the AP poll is concerned, Alabama is number one among the number ones by a pretty significant margin. But if you take a look back to 2006, when they were in 10th, just 2 ahead of Michigan State, and hadn't been ranked number one in a decade and a half, you would not expect that to be the case. So what changed between 2006 and now? Well, if you clicked on this video, you probably already have a decent idea of what I'm about to say, but the answer is pretty straightforward. Nick Saban is about to begin his 16th season as Alabama's head coach, and in that time, he's made a pretty compelling case for being the greatest college football coach of all time. Not even considering his national title at LSU, which you absolutely should, because he did an amazing job there too, Saban's Alabama teams have won 8 SEC titles, 6 national titles, 4 Heisman trophies, and sent about a gajillion players to the NFL. He has somehow managed to do the impossible, and not only meet the expectations of the most demanding fan base in college football, but he may have even exceeded them. But despite the truly delusional level of expectations that have been on him from the very beginning, and I can say that because I'm an Alabama native, graduate, and fan, Nick Saban has ascended to a place that very few in the sport have ever reached. But how has he been able to sustain this level of success for so long? Since 2008, he's never had a team finish with fewer than 10 wins, and has averaged just 1 conference loss per year in what has become the toughest league in football. People like Colin Cowherd have been heralding Nick Saban's demise for a long time, and yet, it is still yet to actually materialize in any meaningful way. Nick Saban has been preaching the same message for over 30 years now. The gospel according to Saban, and it's been unbelievably successful. And I think it's about time someone put it all together into one video, or at least tried to. So buckle up, because we're about to explore the whole story of how a young defensive back at Kent State, who thought he was going to open a car dealership, became the greatest college football coach of all time. After bouncing around from job to job for over a decade, Nick Saban's head coaching career started in 1990 at the University of Toledo. Incidentally, if you're looking for a head coach to lead your football program, the MAC is not the worst place to start. He only spent 1 year at Toledo before bouncing to the NFL to be the defensive coordinator for the Browns, where his head coach was not anyone of consequence, and that definitely wasn't an incredibly formative and important experience for him. But after a few years with the Browns, which ended with their first playoff appearance in 5 years, Saban got the head coach job at Michigan State. But he wasn't a legend immediately. Saban was walking into a program that was under pretty steep NCAA sanctions, including scholarship limits, and those first few years were not great. Saban's early Michigan State teams remind me a lot of Mike Krzyzewski's first teams at Duke, in that they were far from spectacular and definitely didn't indicate that either of them was going to become a legend anytime soon. In today's landscape, there's a good chance that they both would have been fired after a few seasons like that, but Michigan State in the mid-90s was in a position to be patient, and that worked out extremely well for them. Because while the record didn't really reflect it yet, there was something building underneath the surface of that program, and it was about to start to come out. Saban points to a game against Ohio State in 1998 as the moment where his psychological approach to coaching started to change.
We decided to use the approach that we were not going to focus on the outcome, that we were just going to focus on the process of what it took to play the best football you could play, which was to focus on that particular play like it had a history and a life of its own. Don't look at the scoreboard. Don't look at any other external factors. Just all your focus, all your concentration, all your effort, all your toughness, all your discipline to execute went into that particular play. And regardless of what happened on that play, success or failure, you would move on, to the next play. And then you would be able to live with the results regardless of what those results were.
In that case, the result was a huge upset of the number one team in the country and a turning point in Saban's young career as a head coach. That win confirmed that Saban's new inside-out way of doing things worked, and after using it to guide Michigan State to their first 10-win season in over 30 years in 1999, he took the process to LSU. And goodness, was it effective. After a couple of years of recruiting and shaping the program in the way he wanted it to look, LSU won their first title in nearly 50 years in 2003. In just 4 seasons, Saban had turned LSU into a national powerhouse, and through the process, had achieved something he'd never personally come close to before: dominance. Nick Saban has always had this reputation of being a little prickly with the media, and to be fair, a lot of that reputation is earned.
It really doesn't matter what you think. All right, and it really doesn't matter what you say. And I'm hoping that nobody on our team is playing for you, all right, because that's not certainly what I'm doing.
But that idea has never been stronger than when he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. Saban took the job in 2005, and although he actually had a pretty good amount of NFL experience at that point, coaching in Miami was a very different animal to coaching in East Lansing, Michigan, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's not that Saban's process-driven approach wasn't effective in the NFL. He had his Dolphins teams playing some pretty decent football despite all the drama that surrounded them. But it was just different. And sometimes, communicating that difference to reporters and even players was kind of hard. That was a big reason that Saban never really settled in Miami. So when Alabama fired Mike Shula in 2006 and pretty publicly made Saban their number one target, everyone wondered what his next move was going to be. Would he stick it out and stay in Miami to finish what he started? Or would the allure of going back to an environment where he knew his methods could work be too much for him to resist? Nobody knew for sure, but with the rumors about him leaving getting louder all the time, and the Dolphins coming off a pretty disappointing season, the relationship between Saban and the Miami media started to get a little tense.
I don't know how else I can say it, guys. I've said it 3 different occasions, and I don't know how else I can say it. And I don't know why you keep asking. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. What? I shouldn't even have to comment on this. I think I've said this over and over and over again.
Yeah, that didn't age well. But I think this moment highlights something pretty important about Saban's approach to coaching. Nick Saban clashes with the media pretty regularly because in his mind, the people who cover Alabama or the Dolphins or whoever are only there for the final product, not the process. Who's going to start at quarterback? Is this guy going to transfer? Are you going to be the coach of this team when the season starts? All of these are questions about small sections of a very big puzzle. We as consumers want to see the whole thing and how it all fits together. But Saban lives for the meticulous placement of every single piece.
Football is a developmental game, so players need the opportunity to develop before we get to the results, which you all just want results. I mean, there is no process, all right? There is no discipline to execute. I mean, there's none of those things. It's just tell me who's going to be there.
Nick Saban is a utilitarian. Playing that game of appeasing the media works for some coaches, but it just doesn't have much of a place in the process. It's not useful to him. He can and does use press conferences to control the narrative around his teams, though, because that is useful. If someone says something negative about his group, he can use that to bring them up. And if someone says something positive about them, well, that's something else entirely.
I'm trying to get our players to listen to me instead of listening to you guys. You know, all that stuff you write about how good we are and all that stuff they hear on ESPN, it's like poison. You know what I mean? It's like taking poison, like rat poison.
Rat poison has become as much a part of the Saban legend as anything else, but like anything he chooses to say in front of the media, it serves a purpose. To Nick Saban, all of this is a game of chess, and he's got to decide where to move next. And after those frustrating years in Miami, despite what he'd said pretty explicitly to the media, his next move in 2007 was to go back to his roots, the college game, in the welcoming arms of Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
We love college coaching because of the ability that it gives you to affect people, young people. That's why I wanted to come back to college. My heart's here. I love it here. I like to affect people, and that's why we're here. And this obviously is one of the best places in the country to have an opportunity to do that.
I think it's important to point out here that the Alabama program Nick Saban took over in 2007 was not the one that he's built since. People forget this part of the story, but in 2003, just a few years before Saban got the job, Alabama was in serious trouble with the NCAA and was in the midst of some of the worst years in the program's entire history. They were barred from going to a bowl game in 2003, but that wasn't much of a concern anyway because that team was awful. Mike Shula's first Alabama team went 4-9, and if that record looks a little funky for a regular season, it's because the program exploited a weird NCAA rule that allows a team to add an extra game if it's away to Hawaii. So they did that, and then they lost. Things improved once they got off probation, but then regressed back to the mean pretty immediately after that. By the time Mike Shula was fired in 2006, the program had been floundering for well over a decade, all while watching Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU all have sustained success during that same time, which, yuck. Nick Saban wasn't taking over a great program in 2007, so much as he was building one from the ground up. But that's fine, because that's exactly the kind of situation that the process is built for. Nick Saban basically had the freedom to shape Alabama in whatever way he wanted. As a leader, Saban is very good at delegating tasks and developing the people who work under him, but make no mistake about it, decision-making power lies pretty much exclusively with him. The process is his creation, and one of the things that's made him so successful is the painstaking extent to which he sees its correct implementation. This thing is extensive, and from a psychological perspective, there's a lot of benefit to everyone knowing who the boss is in that type of system. And pretty much as soon as he got on campus in 2007, the boss got to work.
With the staff we had, we understood right away, what we were charged with because, not saying anything bad about the previous staff, but it was just different.
One of the things that makes Nick Saban so good is his supporting staff. His college coaches, his assistants are there to recruit. They know who the top 8th graders are, the 9th graders, the 10th graders. They certainly don't focus on one class.
For Coach Saban, the formula is recruiting. It starts in-state, and then it's built within a 5-hour radius. Fortunately, we had a lot of good players in those next 2 upcoming years.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop it right here and tell you that this is one of the bigger understatements that you are ever going to hear. Julio Jones, Mark Barron, Marcell Dareus, Mark Ingram, Dante Hightower. Those are just the guys from that 2008 class who ended up as first-round picks. Not even mentioning all the other guys who wound up just being normal levels of really good. And 2009 was no different. And then 2010, 2011, until now, 15 years later, Alabama is still at the top of the 2023 recruiting rankings. The process starts by hiring coaches who can bring in the top talent from around the country, and then going out and doing it. And it's sustained all the while by the guy who came up with it in the first place.
Everybody in the office, you have a sense of urgency every day on taking care of business and doing your job. The dead period right before signing day, that was like maybe, 5 times an hour. He was walking there, what's up, heard anything going on? I said, no, Coach, I think we're in good shape.
Again, Lance Thompson with just a colossal understatement. Saban and his staff have a profile for every position they recruit for, and while those parameters might change from year to year, they are not going to deviate from them once they've decided. Other coaches and programs might forgo their priorities because a talented guy wants to come to their school, but not Alabama. In his book, 4th and Goal Every Day, about the Alabama program under Saban, former Browns GM Phil Savage wrote that Alabama builds from the inside out, not the outside in. Now, to me, that sounds an awful lot like the other messaging Saban puts out around the process. We're going to do our thing and execute regardless of whatever else is going on. We have our guys, and even if there's a bigger, faster, more talented guy who might want to come here, if he's not what we want, then we don't want him. It's that simple. This was not a case of, we're just going to find some talented guys, throw them all together, and then see what happens. This was a meticulous, painstaking assembly of talent designed to sustain the program for years, and my goodness did it. But even as Saban's team started to pick up momentum in 2008, there was another SEC program around this time who were a few years ahead of Alabama in their development. And as these things tend to work out, they were bound to come together at some point. After a 2007 season that saw several wins vacated because of a scandal involving illegally distributed textbooks from the school bookstore, which, not making this up, I used to work at, Alabama got a couple of very encouraging wins to start 2008. The first one was a beatdown of number 9 Clemson in the Georgia Dome. Hey, who's that guy standing by Tommy Bowden? Yeah, he's probably just some no-name assistant. Definitely not going to be a major problem in the near to mid-future. A win on the road against a heavily favored Georgia team and a very tight win in the Iron Bowl had Alabama undefeated going into the SEC title game. But to go any further, they'd have to beat Tim Tebow's Florida Gators. And although they honestly played really well in that game and even led going into the fourth quarter, Urban Meyer's team roared back in the last 15 minutes and won the conference title, advancing to their second national championship game in 3 seasons. That result, combined with the pretty embarrassing loss in the Sugar Bowl against Utah, saw an otherwise really promising season end on a very sour note. It felt like Alabama was still on an upward trajectory, but they'd won 10 games under Mike Shula just 3 years before that. To show that Saban's process was really working at Alabama in the way that he wanted it to, they were going to have to take the next step. They were going to have to beat Florida. And as if the football gods had willed it to be so, Alabama and Florida made an undefeated beeline for each other in the 2009 regular season. Florida only had 1 game decided by fewer than 10 points, and Alabama had their program's first Heisman Trophy winner, Mark Ingram, and an almost upsettingly good defense propelling them to Atlanta. But would they have enough in the tank this time to take out Florida, the defending national champions, who'd shown little to no signs of slowing down? Would they be able to eliminate the turnovers and late defensive lapses that had cost him the year before? Well, in a word, yes. From pretty much the first snap until the last one, Nick Saban's team appeared to take his words about each down having a history and life of its own to heart, because they were not giving Florida anything. 88 rushing yards as a team for a group that had averaged over 200 for the season. Alabama won, Tebow cried, and Nick Saban's process at Alabama officially hit critical mass. And barring a couple of unfortunate bumps in the road here or there, they've been rolling ever since. The vision he laid out for the program at his opening press conference came to fruition, but despite what you might think, that didn't happen without some serious tweaks along the way. We've talked a good bit up until now about what the process is, but as my last point here, I want to take a minute to address what the process is not. Despite what the name might suggest, the process is not a step-by-step instruction manual on how to build the best program in the country. Like, it isn't just like you could just write it down and give it to a coach like Mark Mangino or whoever, and then expect them to turn into the greatest coach of all time. Based on how it gets talked about, I feel like that's how a lot of people think it works, but that ignores a pretty key component of what makes it and Nick Saban so successful. The standards that the process demands don't change from year to year. Those have pretty much been the same since Saban was at Toledo, or even before that. But the methodology does. Here's what I mean by that. In 2006, so just a year before Saban's first year on the job at Alabama, the average number of plays per game in college football was 63.5. Incidentally, in Saban's first 3 years with the team, Alabama were ranked 40th, 89th, and 57th in plays per game, even while dominating the time of possession in a lot of their games, which should give you some idea about the kind of football they were trying to play. It was very much that NFL-style, grind it out, make their ass quit kind of deal, and honestly, unless you're one of those sickos who's way into defense, it was kind of hard to watch sometimes. But by 2013, the college game had changed almost completely. The national average was closer to 72 plays, and Alabama, still really good but not really changing a whole lot tactically, was ranked 118th. Now, pace of play isn't always a great predictor of success on its own. The 2 teams that played in that year's title game, Auburn and Florida State, finished 58th and 94th in that same stat. But sensing, correctly, that the game was going in a different direction, Saban did something that you might not expect someone so seemingly set in his ways to do. He tried something different. In 2014, Saban made the very bold decision to hire Lane Kiffin, recently disgraced head coach of USC, to be his offensive coordinator. Despite some of his shortcomings as a head coach up to that point, both in college and in the pros, Kiffin retained a lot of his reputation as something of an offensive genius, and almost overnight, he lived up to it in Tuscaloosa. With an offense led by Blake Sims, a former running back who is still probably my favorite Alabama player of all time, Kiffin transformed Alabama into a modern team who could score on you at literally any time. Their plays per game jumped from under 64 to almost 73 that season. Alabama football was fun after Kiffin got there, and even since he's moved on to bigger and better things, I think it's pretty telling that Saban didn't just revert back to the old stuff immediately. Coaches like Saban, who rely on systems to be successful, can do that for about as long as it takes for other teams to figure the system out, or for the game to evolve to the point that the system becomes relevant. The coaches that sustain their success over longer periods of time are the ones who can adapt their systems to whatever changes might come their way. which is exactly what Saban has done his entire career. I would compare what Saban's been able to do to another great coach. No, not that one, although there are definitely some similarities there too. But when Sir Alex Ferguson saw that his tactics from the 1990s didn't necessarily fit the personnel he had in the 2000s, he changed his system too. Suddenly, it was Ronaldo, Rooney, and Carlos Tevez running the greatest counterattack of all time right into people's faces, and there was nothing anyone in the Premier League could do about it. Saban's talked a lot about how up-tempo and no-huddle offenses make it really hard for coaches to substitute for different packages. So what did he do? He started recruiting smaller, nimbler, more versatile players in the front seven that could adjust to certain situations without having to make a substitution. It seems simple, but believe me when I tell you that not everybody does this, and if they do, they don't do it as well as Nick Saban does. The process is uncompromising, but it's still changing even to this day, because he knows that if it doesn't, you're just setting all those really talented players up to fail. And you should know by now that that is not what Nick Saban is about.
I want to win every game we play. I've never gone out to play a game. We've never gone out to play a game where we didn't want to win, and it wasn't important to win, and we didn't focus on winning and put all our energy into winning. But I think it's more important that you're able to take your expectations and bridge them into the process of what it takes to be successful.
You could hear a lot of what Saban says about all this process stuff and just attribute it to coach speak, but I think the more you watch of him, the less it seems like he's just spewing out what he thinks we want to hear. He cares a lot about what he's saying. The man is 70 years old, and he's still speaking at leadership events and hosting camps and spreading his message to as many people as possible, regardless of how old or how good at football they might be. This isn't just about football to him. To me, he's just one of those rare people whose own personal principles have matched up perfectly with the profession they're in. This is just genuinely who he is, and that genuineness has given him a huge advantage, whether it's in a recruit's living room, or in the middle of a long film meeting, or out on the field itself. Listen to former Clemson coach and Alabama native Tommy Bowden describe that exact phenomenon.
He's very confident in his process, which is very comprehensive. It deals with performance and academics, their performance off the field, their performance on the field, their performance in practice, their performance in the games, how to behave. And you're in a team meeting with 85 players and all of their eyes are on you. Then if there's a weakness in the armor, the players can sense it if you don't feel sold on what you're talking about and talk with a boldness and a confidence in what you're saying that, man, this will work.
More than anything else, that conviction about what he's doing, how all the pieces fit into one another, the level of commitment it requires, all of it, is what's allowed Nick Saban to be so successful. Because there's absolutely no doubt in his mind that the gospel he's preaching is the true one. From the time he spent in the NFL, to that upset over Ohio State or the win over Florida in 2009, there are plenty of examples that help reaffirm the process as not only a formula for success, but as a personal code, a way to filter out distractions and conquer adversity, and show that progress is possible in a world that doesn't always make sense. That's what the process means to Nick Saban, and why he's been able to sell it to so many people over such a long career. When he says things like this in 2007...
I'm not going to talk about what we're going to accomplish, we're going to talk about how we're going to do it.
It isn't just a line to use at an introductory press conference. I know that because 15 years later, he's still saying the same exact stuff, just with a few more gray hairs. It's not just a sales pitch to him. Like I said earlier, he doesn't have the kind of mindset to waste words like that or say something he doesn't mean. Okay, except for that one thing, but that was different. Nick Saban is a great tactical mind, an exceptional motivator, a meticulous planner, and a world-class leader of men. But powering all of that is an unwavering belief in the way that he goes about those things. A confidence that's born not out of arrogance, but out of years of experience seeing that these ideas work. If you maximize your effort at every point along the way, there's a good chance that the journey is going to take you further than you could have otherwise imagined. It's simple, but incredibly difficult to execute in practice, which is why Saban is such a singular figure in college sports right now. The gospel Saban preaches is not about the titles he's won or the trophies his players have earned. Instead, it's about the thousands of small, seemingly insignificant choices they had to make along the way to reach them. Because to him, they're not small at all. Those things are what make all that other stuff possible. And paradoxically, the man espousing the approach that focuses as little as possible on results has achieved one of the greatest coaching careers we've ever seen. everybody, I'm Will, and I hope this video got you in the mood for college football because that's exactly what it did for me, and just in time, too. If you enjoyed the content, please do leave us a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. This episode was super long, but there was still a ton of stuff I had to leave out of the script for the sake of time. But if you're interested in the rest of the story, I'll be doing a TLDR video over on the Patreon talking about some of that stuff. Next week won't be quite this long, I promise, but it will feature another incredibly heavy hitter in the football world as we celebrate the start of the NFL season. I can't believe it's that time of year already, but that's all the time we have for you guys today. We hope to see you back here soon, but until then, I'm Will. Bye.